began with a scream echoing down an empty hallway. 3 boys leaning in. It was meant to be a cruel prank, a rite of passage. They cornered the new girl and tried to lift her skirt. A thoughtless act that could have ended in humiliation. They believed they'd broken her spirit. But in the next heartbeat, 2 of them would be limping, afraid to walk the halls again. The 3rd boy? He never came back to school. Those aren't dramatic embellishments. They're the cold, hard facts. Because what they didn't know was that this teenager wasn't fragile. She was trained, and she was ready. Imagine the scene, the echo of shuffling sneakers, the sudden snap of fabric ripping, a sharp intake of breath. And then, silence. A pause. A movement so fluid, so precise. It stopped the world. Before she catapulted one of them over her shoulder, she was just the new girl in 10th grade. Someone polite, someone quiet, someone with a secret. But this town, this school, was about to learn something unexpected. Because this new girl was no ordinary transfer student. She was Emma Jenkins, a grade 10th newcomer with a black belt in karate. And in that moment, she wasn't just defending herself, she was flipping the script. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I still think about that moment, the stillness in the hallway, the way the lockers hummed with silence, like they were holding their breath too. The way Emma didn't flinch, even with their hands on her, like she'd already decided how this would end long before it started. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She looked at them, and something in her eyes made Kyle hesitate just for a second. But by then, it was too late. They thought they picked a victim. What they got was a mirror. And the thing about mirrors is they don't lie. I didn't know her story then. None of us did. All we saw was a girl with her head down, walking the halls like she was apologizing for even being there. But what we missed was everything she was carrying, and everything she was holding back. Emma Roberts wasn't just the new girl from Atlanta. She was something else entirely. Something most people wouldn't understand unless they'd lived it. And I mean really lived it. The kind of life where strength isn't a choice, it's the only way to survive. I remember hearing the whispers that first week. She don't talk much. She's weird. She looked like she'd been through some stuff. They said it like it was a joke. Like pain made her less. But it was that pain that made her more. She'd been raised by her aunt after her mom passed. Heart failure. Sudden. Emma was 12. And her dad. He wasn't in the picture. Not really. He called once a year. Maybe. She used to stare out the window some days like she was waiting on someone who'd already decided not to come. Her aunt didn't play games. She kept the house tight, the rules tighter. No parties, no late nights. But what she did give Emma was discipline, control, a place to put all that anger. Twice a week, she drove Emma across town to a small martial arts studio with fogged-up windows and mats that smelled like old sweat and vinegar. That's where Emma learned how to move in silence, how to breathe through the pain, how to turn being underestimated into an advantage. She didn't train to fight. She trained to remember who she was, to keep from becoming what the world tried to turn her into. That school in our town? It wasn't ready for someone like her. A black girl from a city that moved fast, dropped into a school where everybody knew everybody, and difference made you a target. It didn't take long before the wrong people noticed. Tyler, Brandon, Kyle. They could smell confidence, even when it was quiet. And quiet confidence. That's the kind that scares the hell out of boys like them. They laughed at her shoes, said her hair looked like a Brillo pad, pushed her books off her desk, drew things on her locker. Each time she picked it up, cleaned it off, kept walking. But every time they tried her, she tightened, not scared, just controlled. I used to wonder if that silence meant she was weak. Now I know different. That kind of silence, That's what strength sounds like before it speaks. And still, nobody stepped in. Teachers saw the whispers, the smirks, the comments in the hallways, but they didn't want to get involved. It was boys being boys. It was just a phase. Until it wasn't. Until that day by the gym lockers, when the line between teasing and assault got crossed and all that silence Emma had been carrying turned into something else, something they didn't see coming. And when it happened, when she moved, it was fast, precise, the kind of movement that doesn't come from anger. It comes from training, from muscle memory, from having to defend yourself long before anyone ever tried to lift your skirt. I saw Tyler's feet leave the ground. Brandon stagger back into the wall, holding his face. Kyle frozen like he'd seen a ghost. And Emma? She just adjusted her jacket, picked up her bag, and walked out like nothing happened. But everything had changed. And this town was about to learn what happens when you push someone too far. When you mistake silence for surrender. When you cross a line you can't uncross. And the part that nobody ever talks about, the part that still keeps me up at night, is that it wasn't just what they did to her that day. It's what they'd already gotten away with before her. Because Emma wasn't the first. She was just the last one they ever tried. And that's where everything unraveled. Because once people started asking questions, they found more than just bruised egos and locker room rumors. They found records, complaints, warnings that had been ignored. And suddenly, the boys everyone cheered for on Friday nights weren't just rowdy seniors anymore. They were suspects. And Emma? She wasn't just a new girl anymore. She was a witness, a fighter, a mirror, and the whole town was about to see its reflection. I see her face in my mind's eye, the new girl, half hidden in the glare of fluorescent lights that felt colder here than any winter night. I can still hear the gym shoes squeaking off screen, the rumble of lockers, and that soft Atlanta accent she never tried to erase. I'm speaking now from a place of remembering, of waking up sometimes with a tightness in my chest because I carried her story with me. I want you to feel the weight of this. Emma lost everything before she even walked through those doors. Her parents, gone in a single instant. A car crash in mid-Georgia heat. 1 minute they were singing along to the radio. The next, nothing. Just the echo of metal twisting and hearts breaking. She was 12 when it happened, a child who learned grief with her mother's final breath, who learned responsibility through her aunt's tears. The aunt who took her in, who told her every night, "You're stronger than you know, baby girl. Keep your head up, keep your heart open, but protect it too." Those years alone shaped Emma. I can still imagine her room in Georgia, dusty sunlight through drawn curtains, a single chair by the window. On the desk, a medal she never wore, ribbons she never talked about. They were her secrets, the ones she kept hidden even from herself. She trained in karate because she needed to remember how to stand on her own. She didn't train to beat people. She trained so she wouldn't fall apart on the day she thought nothing in her life made sense anymore. I remember watching her, myself seeing through her eyes that I would have recognized that kind of loneliness. It's the kind that veils itself in calm. You see no cracks in her voice, no hesitation, because she's been practiced in stillness. She knows how to breathe into pain and make it small. When she moved here, to that Midwestern town where everyone played football and everyone had a grocery store lineage, she stepped into a new kind of isolation. The high school smelled like sweat and ambition. All those Friday night lights, jerseys, and pep rallies. It made her feel distant. Tyler, Brandon, Kyle. They clicked into view fast. They were polished, predatory. Tyler wore a Letterman jacket and that smile that knows you're lower in the pecking order. Brandon had the loudest laugh like he was trying to make sure you heard he didn't care. And Kyle, he could have spoken soft and still bullied you with his presence. In that school, they were kings. And she was a visitor. Each morning I'd see them gather by the lockers, like sharks circling prey no one else saw yet. They mocked her hair, whispered jokes, nothing loud enough to land a call home but loud enough to dissolve her. She said nothing, just carried the quiet weight of someone invisible. And I watched, powerless, because creating a classroom is easy. Changing the culture? That demands courage. And most of us didn't have it. Inside, she was preparing. Every night I imagined her pulling up scrubs of karate before bed, uniform and hush, practicing forms in the dark, letting her grief and pain slip beneath each kata until she found center again. Her medals waited for her in a box, surrounded by dust, as if time had forgotten them. She didn't open that box for years, not until the day she saw those boys laughing, chicken scratch scrawled on her locker. That's the day she remembered exactly who she was. She walked out with her bag over one shoulder and her spine straight, her aunt's words in her heart. That metal box unopened, but its power still resonating. I remember my heart pounding, seeing her eyes find each scrawl, like she was reading a name, an accusation, a dare. To them, she seemed small. To her, this was the moment she practiced for. This school didn't know she wasn't broken because she wasn't there to stay broken. She carried that ghost of loss into the school cafeteria the first day. It followed her like a shadow in summer. But it wasn't just grief she carried. It was craftsmanship in survival. Years spent learning to be still in chaos and in silence, building steel in her lungs, in her arms, in her purpose. I think of Tyler's sneer when she refused to smile back, Brandon's snicker when she didn't laugh at his jokes, Kyle's glare when she simply straightened her shoulders and walked away. They assumed the silence was weakness. They were wrong. When she stepped toward the lockers, tight hallway and litter in her path, I could feel that moment stretching, as if time slowed, a bead of sweat on the tile, a breath held too long. It was more intense than anything I've felt living here, like watching a storm that didn't need thunder to terrify you. And I saw them close in on her, 3 boys, senior year kings, thinking they were playing, thinking she'd react out loud, break under the collective weight of it all. But Emma had long learned that snapping wasn't what strength meant. To react outward, to shout. They could use that against her. Instead, she stayed physical in silence. Her body said what her voice couldn't risk. Before her first step was taken, she had already measured them. 2 long strides to Tyler, 1 quick arc of her hand. In her mind, she recited the old moves until muscle memory took over, until the fighting stopped being internal and became instinct. That's who she was, refined in stillness, precise under pressure. And that afternoon, in that locked-up hallway, the quiet lifted with one swift motion, and everything changed. I can still feel it, that week of small strikes. Day 1, they knocked her tray from her hand in the cafeteria. Books crashed like broken promises. Day 2, her locker slammed shut behind her, steel jaws snapping like a beast. Every incident carried a whisper, a rumor trailing behind her like a shadow. She don't talk. Weird. Hiding something. Those whispers were weapons, each rumor a stone. By day 4, the teasing had sharpened. I saw Tyler flip his Letterman jacket like he was sizing her up, while Brandon and Kyle circled with smirks. And I felt the tension in my gut twist tighter, like waiting for glass to shatter. And then came the day in the gym locker hallway. I walk that same corridor in my mind, even now. The echo of distant whistles, the crease of locker doors swinging open. I smelled the gym mats, rubber warmth, and that faint chemical sting of cleaning supplies. A scent that meant false safety. That day, Tyler stepped into her path in slow motion. She looked up, and our eyes met, mine and hers. I felt the frost settling in my chest before the words were ever spoken. He joked, first soft, then dark, the color draining from his voice as the teasing turned cruel. I felt her freeze, rigid as steel. When Brandon reached for her skirt, laughing, erasing her dignity, I felt a slow explosion inside me, like grief and anger mixing into something that pulsed in my veins. And that's when she moved. She didn't scream. She didn't struggle. Her hand shot up, gripping his wrist, and the next part happened in silence. Wham! Brandon's shoulder cracked against the locker. Air escaped in a gasp I heard clear across the hallway. I felt tears in my throat, not for Brandon, but for all the moments she'd swallowed before this one. Then Kyle lunged, an angry blur, but Emma spun. No hesitation. He hit the lockers, eyes wide, breath caught in his throat. Tyler reached for her, lunged, but she countered, swivel and shift, every moment precise. Lockers rattled, shoes slammed, and then silence again. In that instant, I saw something else. Not rage, not fear, but quiet resolve. Her hand slid off Tyler's arm. She tucked her bag over her shoulder. She walked away, and the boys lay there behind her, stunned. They said nothing, mouths open, no courage left. That corridor was empty except for her departing silhouette, and the moment she turned from them, that's when it hit me. Most of us cheered. We clapped. We hooted. Bullies felled by a single girl? We felt on the right side of justice for once, but not everyone did. Because while Emma gathered herself and walked into that noon light, sirens of authority hadn't just arrived for her, they arrived for her opponents. And inside the sirens rode more than concern. They rode controversy. While most of the school buzzed with, "Did you see that move?" One parent demanded action, a parent with influence, a voice that reached into principal's office corners. One call, one message, one powerful parent. They wanted Emma expelled. That parent had power. They had alliances. And suddenly the girl who defended herself was on trial, not in the classroom, but in whispers behind closed doors, in hallways where teachers looked at Emma differently now, where the weight of one decision reverberated in every locked glance. And that's where we pause. A girl defended, a school divided, a community about to reckon with the question we all feared to ask, but deep down, felt in our bones. What happens when the defender becomes the defendant? I still feel that afternoon's heat in my bones, the kind of heat that doesn't leave your body when the voice of the crowd fades. That day, the school halls buzzed like an angry hive, teenagers stepping in, leaning in, pointing in hushed tones. And beneath it all, a question pulsed. Who is Emma Jenkins? Social media lit up like a wildfire that afternoon. 1 minute, it was just hallway gossip. The next, someone posted a shaky video. A girl in a red jacket, calm, walking past 3 sprawled boys. The captions called her Karate Girl, Ninja New Girl. I scrolled through comments filled with awe and outrage. Half admired her, half wanted her gone. A local news crew knocked on the school doors before the bell rang. Their headlines twisted what happened into something darker. Violent new student attacks 3 boys. I watched their faces on camera, smirks, raised eyebrows, like Emma had stabbed someone instead of defended herself. And right beside them, the school logo, plastered behind every anchor. Inside those hallowed halls, everything shifted. Our principal convened emergency meetings. Teachers looked at Emma like she was made of glass, or a weapon. I could sense the shift in the air. The authority that once frowned at bullying now recoiled at her strength. And then came the official investigation. I stood in that office, black plastic chairs pressing into my skin. I watched Emma walk in, silent, head high, bag swinging at her side, as though she was headed to class. I could feel the room's eyes through the walls, curious, suspicious, calculating. The interview started. Emma was quiet as always, measured. "I was defending myself," she said in her controlled voice, every word steady, intentional, like she'd rehearsed how to defend herself, not her actions. Brandon, on the other hand, was in tears. His words stumbled out. "She broke my wrist." I felt a tight ache in my chest. Not anger, not relief, just a pull of heartbreak. Because every bruise left on her took an echo in my gut. Tyler spoke next. He said, "She freaked out." That's what they called it. Emotion, panic, loss of control, not defense, not discipline. That was the spin. That was the slipper they used to push her into a corner. Then the tape surfaced. I watched someone carry an unlabeled DVD into the office. The school security guy said it got corrupted, that it was blank, that somehow, right when she defended herself, the tape skipped. Something about that missing footage echoed in me like an accusation. I started paying attention to who didn't speak. Teachers hovered in hallways but dissipated when Emma walked by. Some offered nods. Others lowered their gazes. Everything felt calculated, support hidden intentionally. Like whispers behind walls. Rumors surfaced that her aunt's lawyer had tried to seal her martial arts records, sealed because Emma's past victories were supposed to stay private. But once Texas records leaked, so did her reputation. The records showed county tournaments, ribbons, proof in paper that she hadn't just picked up a belt. But boys here saw the belt and heard threat. Each turn in investigation felt like someone rewrote her story. Why did she strike so hard? What was she hiding in her past? And every time they asked, I felt the world shift under her feet. I remember sitting in my car late that night, engine quiet, street lamps buzzing above. I held a paper cup half full with lukewarm coffee, one hand on the steering wheel, one on the cup. And I thought, is she being judged for saving herself? The air tasted dusty, heavy. I prayed she wouldn't be alone when they asked her to explain what she didn't regret. But she wasn't alone. Her aunt showed up, quiet, a solemn presence. The aunt who drove Emma from dojo to dojo year after year. The aunt who lost so much, and still believed in this girl's spirit. I saw them cross paths in the corridor, one paying attention, the other trained attention. That moment carried more hope than any headline ever could. Still, the official narrative twisted. Emma was called a threat. Her aunt whispered, preemptive. And somewhere in that title, violent student, everything we knew as truth got tangled. And me? I started to question. How did we get to a place where defending oneself was seen as a crime? When the story is retold by fear, not facts? And who do we call guilty when the bully sprawls on the ground? But Emma, she stayed silent, calm, determined. When the room spun with endless questions, she held herself still, as if she'd been holding still her whole life, just for this. All those nights of training under neon dojo lights, all those grief-filled nights alone in a Georgia bedroom, all that pain turned inward, waiting for a chance to become purpose. I saw in her silence not guilt, but power. I felt in her stillness not retreat, but resilience. Mysterious, grounded, unshakable. Because this investigation? It wasn't about what happened in that hallway. It was about what we allowed to happen every day. Silence, injustice, fear, and one girl's refusal to let any of that story define her. And now, as the world watches Emma Jenkins, I wonder, what does it cost to stand up for yourself in a world that fears anyone who dares? I remember the first time I heard her aunt speak in court. The hush didn't come from the judge. I felt it in my chest, like the world stopped breathing for just a moment. That courtroom smelled cold, air conditioning too loud, whispers echoing in the walls. Emma stood by her aunt. The gallery was full, reporters, students, parents who'd come only for the spectacle. My own hands sat folded, knuckles white on my legs, fingers pressing into skin as if trying to hold something together. Her aunt rose. She was the picture of quiet strength, her voice soft at first, but each word carved into the air. They targeted her because she's black, she said. No pause, no apology. They targeted her because she was quiet, because she didn't scream when they pulled at her clothes. But they didn't know she was trained to survive. I felt a tremor near my heart at that last line. Not fear, not relief, reverence. Her words cut deeper than any rebuke in that courtroom. I thought I knew everything about Emma. But in that instant, I realized for years we'd only seen what they wanted us to see. It wasn't just self-defense. It was a shield raised long before the moment she needed it. Then came the secret file. The lawyer opened it slowly. Photographs of a 12-year-old Emma, wide-eyed, shaking, almost invisible against the backdrop of an empty park. The caption, "Attempted Abduction 2018. A parent statement, a neighbor account, a report that had never made news." That's when I felt it. An ache so sharp I gasped. She'd been 12, found hiding behind a swing set, too afraid to speak. That's when her aunt signed her up for martial arts. Not trophies, but tools. Not medals, but measures of dignity. She wasn't just defending against bullies, she was fighting a memory that had followed her when she closed her eyes at night. I could see, in that courtroom, the curve of Emma's jaw, the way she clenched her fists, not in anger, but in understanding. Not for revenge, but for reclaiming space. A space a frightened child never got back. The judge leaned forward. Papers rustled. Breath caught. And when the words came, ruling found in Emma's favor, the room held itself. They reprimanded the school. They acknowledged a failure to protect. Tyler's father, on the board, stood, red-faced, and resigned. His name whispered like a secret that nobody wanted to admit they knew. And outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. But inside me, flashes came too. Memories of when I first walked those halls, of looking the other way, believing silence was safe, of thinking courage was loud, and of learning, in Emma, that courage could whisper until you needed to shout. Today, I don't just remember that hallway fight. I remember the face of a 12-year-old girl in those photos. I remember her aunt's testimony cutting through fear. I remember the judge's gavel falling like thunder. Because that moment wasn't just a legal victory. It was a reclaiming of a narrative. A refusal to let a community write her out. A demand that history hold its witnesses accountable. Emma didn't just win in court. She won something deeper. She won the right to exist, unapologetically strong, unashamedly wounded, and fiercely unbroke. I can still see the final day at that school. Sunlight filtering through dusty windows, whiteboard eraser streaks beneath the clock, and the quiet hum of an ending year hanging in the air. You could taste it in the hallways, the charged suspense of decisions made, of people about to scatter. I watched Emma walk the halls one last time, but this time, she moved differently. The tension that once coiled in her shoulders, infused by weeks of whispers and courtroom headlines, it was gone. What remained was the stance of someone who belongs, even when belonging wasn't granted. When she left that school by choice, wholehearted, deliberate, it wasn't escape. It was elevation. She didn't skip out because she was afraid. She walked away because she was done being boxed in by fear and judgment. On the final morning, the halls were still. I saw her pause at locker 302, fingers brushing over the scratched graffiti that once targeted her. Then, she left something behind. To the next quiet girl, don't let them decide who you are. I thought of every girl who ever held her voice back because nobody asked for it. Emma asked instead for change. I felt betrayal in the silence she left behind. Not to her, it was power in relinquishment, but to a community that once demoted strength to violence and called defense a crime. It led me to the big questions, the ones that keep me awake. Why do we overlook the quiet ones? Why does justice hinge on cameras, parent influence, and a viral video? Would Emma have been believed? Would she have mattered if she didn't have skill in her fists? I thought of Brandon. He dropped out by fall. I saw the papers, the absences. I imagined his pain, the realization that his actions caused something he couldn't just laugh off. And maybe he just couldn't stare down the girl he underestimated. Then there was Kyle. Online apology, anonymous. No face, no explanation. Just a typed out, "I'm sorry." He never looked me in the eye again. I wonder what forgiveness feels like when it comes in silence, late, and in pixels. And Tyler? He didn't stick around to answer questions. He disappeared, moved. They say his father pulled him out, but disappearance feels like admission. I felt a hollow in my chest when I heard he left town, a reminder that those with power sometimes run from consequences. But this isn't just about them. It's about her. Some call her a hero. Some still call her dangerous. But Emma Jenkins never raised her voice. She only raised her guard. I say this now not as narrator, but as witness. In that silence, I heard something more powerful than any shout. I heard agency. I heard survival speaking in form, not fury. She chose path, not panic. Grace, not grief. Boundaries, not bloodshed. And here's the truth I carry. No cloak. No fanfare. Just a teenage girl who refused to be defined by what others thought she should be. It leaves me asking, how do we honor that kind of strength? The kind that whispers but echoes. The kind that moves us without noise but with weight. If you saw yourself in Emma, quiet, unseen, capable, carry this with you. Being underestimated doesn't mean you are less, and staying silent doesn't mean you lack power. Emma didn't need to shout to matter. She made them listen by standing. I want you to sit with this for a second. Not just what she did, not just what they did, but what you felt hearing it. Because I've carried this story for years like a quiet weight across my chest. One of those stories that doesn't shout, doesn't beg to be told, but sits in the corners of your memory, waiting, until silence is no longer safety. And now I'm asking you to carry it with me. What would you have done if that was your daughter? If your child came home with eyes that won't meet yours, fists clenched like they're trying to hold in the tremble? Would you tell her to sit down and be quiet? Or would you help her build a world where she could stand? What would you have done if you saw it happen in your school? Would you look the other way and pretend it wasn't your fight? Or would you be the voice that breaks the silence? Because here's the truth. Emma's story ain't rare. It's not a fairy tale. It's a warning, a reminder of what happens when people in power close their eyes, and the ones without it are left to defend themselves in shadows. And that's why I'm telling it now. Because somewhere out there, another quiet girl is folding her hands in her lap, trying not to be noticed, trying not to be next. She don't know she's got fire in her yet. She don't know that silence can be strength, but only if it's chosen, not forced. So if this moved you, if it made you feel something in your chest that don't go away easy, tell us in the comments. Tell us what you would have done, what you did do, what stories you're still carrying in your own silence. We want to hear your story. Because Emma ain't the only one, and some of y'all been holding your own truth way too long. And if you thought this was intense, wait till you hear what happened to the boy who disappeared for 3 years, bullied until he vanished, only to return with a secret that made this whole town stop breathing. Subscribe. Because these stories ain't just for watching, they're for waking up. And if we don't tell them, who will?